by whom Ashritaha, taken refuge, Tirthapadaha, of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Charanaha, feet, Vyasana Atayaha, which vanquish dangers. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. What is difficult to achieve for determined men who have taken refuge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead's lotus feet? His feet are the source of sacred rivers like the Ganges, which put an end to the dangers of mundane life. Please repeat after me. What is difficult to achieve for determined men who have taken refuge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead's lotus feet? His feet are the source of sacred rivers like the Ganges, which put an end to the dangers of mundane life. Purport. The words Yair Ashritas Tirthapadas Charana are significant here. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is known as Tirthapada. The Ganges is called a sacred river because it emanates from the toes of Vishnu. The Ganges is meant to eradicate all the material distresses of the conditioned souls. For any living entity, therefore, who has taken shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, nothing is impossible. Kardama Muni is special not because he was a great mystic, but because he was a great devotee. Therefore, it is said here that for a great devotee like Kardama Muni, nothing is impossible. Although yogis can perform wonderful feats, as Kardama has already displayed, Kardama was more than a yogi because he was a great devotee of the Lord. Therefore, he was more glorious than an ordinary yogi. As it is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, out of many yogis, he who is a devotee of the Lord is first class. For a person like Kardama Muni, there is no question of being conditioned. He was already a liberated soul, and better than the demigods who are also, and better than the demigods who are also conditioned. Although he was enjoying with his wife and many other women, he was above material conditional life. Therefore, the word Vyasanatayaha is used to indicate that he was beyond the position of conditioned soul. He was transcendental to all material limitations. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Shakshurunmilitamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Bhashyatya Teshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I was born in the darkness of ignorance. My spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. Offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Mukam karoti vatsalam pango langaite girim yatkripatamaham vande. Shri Guru Shri Dinatarinam Tavivasmi na jivami. Tavivina iti vigya devitvam nayamam charanantikam. Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this morning's Bhagavatam class. The chapter name, Devahuti's Lamentation. Tirthapadas. This particular word, phrase, has been mentioned a few times in Bhagavatam. Tirthapada is another name of Supreme Personality of Godhead. Tirtha means sanctified water. Here we call Charanamrita, the water we bathe the Lord, we call, in Bengal tradition, we call it as Charanamrita. I don't know about the other North Indian, but in South India we call it as Tirtham. Means it's a water which is washed the lotus feet of the Lord or the body of the Lord. So it's called Tirtham. And since the Lord produces Tirtham, or by washing his lotus feet, the Pada, the sanctified water is produced, he is called Tirthapada. So the Ganges, we all know, here Prabhupada says, emanates from the toes of Vishnu. In other instances it is mentioned that it touches the lotus feet of the Lord when during his incarnation as Vamana, Urukrama, when he pierced the ether, the sky, with his toes, when he expanded himself to cover the three planetary systems, when he pierced the sky, the Ganges licked, touching his lotus feet to this material world. So she becomes special, or she has the property of purifying everyone, purifying people's sinful reactions, because she has touched the lotus feet of the Lord. Or here Prabhupada says, since she emanates from the lotus feet of the Lord. So that's the glory of Ganges. Just a month ago, I was in Mayapur and I had the pleasure of taking bath in Ganges. I love taking bath in Ganges. When I used to live there, I used to go there every day and go for a swim. It is just so refreshing, especially hot days in India. Even when I was there, it was kind of winter is setting in. It was still a bit chilly. But just to go for a swim, it was just very refreshing. I was in Vrindavan for a few days, 10 days or so. So Vrindavan is all dusty and a bit hot, and then came to Mayapur, and then just going for a swim, it just felt very refreshing. Of course, I'm taking bath every day 2-3 times in the shower, but it didn't feel that refreshment what I felt taking bath in Ganges. So it's very purifying. Because she is emanating from the lotus feet of the Lord. Because the lotus feet of the Lord is the object of worship for the devotees. The only aspiration devotees have is the lotus feet of the Lord. So for devotees, anything which touches or remotely in relationship with the lotus feet of the Lord is very refreshing, both internally and externally. The devotees, to that extent, are not even interested to look at the face of the Lord. They are quite happy just with the lotus feet of the Lord. Even Prabhupada mentions this many times in his lectures. When we worship the Lord, when we look at the form of the Lord, one should always start meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord. Start lotus feet of the Lord and gradually qualify yourself to move to his face or to his lips. But for devotees, even though we can grow up, but we are just very satisfied just with the lotus feet of the Lord. We are happy, just satisfied. And Srimad Bhagavatam the first canto is considered the lotus feet of the Lord. And Prabhupada put in a lot of effort in just the first canto. It's the biggest canto you can find. So he's spoken a lot about, provide a lot of purports in his first canto because it represents the lotus feet of the Lord. Okay. So I'm just going to, since it's a bold statement made by Sukadeva Goswami here, just summarizing. Is it Sukadeva Goswami or Devahuti who's saying this? Devahuti, I think. Where is this? Some Uvacha. Yeah, it's still going. Anyway, it's Devahuti, am I right? Been following the trend? Yeah, okay. That's fine. Irrespective, where was I? Yeah. It's a bold statement made here, spoken by Sukadeva Goswami here, that men who have taken refuge of the Supreme Personality's lotus feet, what is difficulty? What is difficult? Everything is simple or easily achievable for somebody who has taken shelter of the Supreme Personality called as lotus feet. So this kind of, for devotees, this is a very assuring statement. We are in this material world, tossed and turned, exhausted by enjoying and suffering the life, millions of lifetimes of accumulated sinful activities. We come to this human form of life, and we still find it. It's not a, we still find it, even though the process is very simple, we still find it difficult, not easy to practice or go through the process of devotional service. We struggle with our senses, with our mind, to keep up our sadhana. But statements like this gives reassurance for practitioners, that people like me struggling, that gives confidence that the lotus feet of the Lord makes the process, or any process, very simple and easy, or it's easily achievable, and it is not difficult. So it's very reassuring statement for the devotees. So since it's a statement, I'm just going to substantiate it with other references from Srimad Bhagavatam, which glorifies it's all right, you can go, which glorifies the lotus feet of the Lord. So we can see the pastimes of Ganges, where Ganges descends to the earth, and she is glorified because, as I mentioned before, she touches the lotus feet of the Lord, and she has the quality of purifying the 3 planetary systems because she has come in touch with the lotus feet of the Lord. And by taking bath in Ganges, she eliminates all the sinful activities a person have accumulated. So she destroys all the prarabdha karma, all the previous activities. Of course, the desire for sense enjoyment, that's still there. What is that verse in Bhagavad Gita? Vishya nivartante nityaharasya jahinam raso varjam raso apisan. The rasa to enjoy is still there. So that gets purified by the lotus feet of the Lord, by holding on to the lotus feet of the Lord. Even though the Ganges can purify the prarabdha karma, all the previous sinful activities, the desire which is still left behind is purified by the lotus feet of the Lord, by worshipping or engaging devotion service of the Lord. The great personalities like Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva is the surrogate father of all the living entities within this material world. And he is the husband of the most formidable force, Durga Devi, Esha Gunamaya Mamaya Duratyaya. And so he's not an ordinary person. His very name means greatness, or Shiva means auspiciousness. But that Shiva, he becomes more glorious because he beholds the Ganges water in his head, which is touched by the lotus feet of the Lord. Since the already great personality Shiva somehow or other comes in contact with the lotus feet of the Lord, his name and glories becomes even more glorious. He becomes even more auspicious than what he is, because of the association with the lotus feet of the Lord. The lotus feet of the Lord, of Krishna, is called the lotus feet, the acharyas have explained, because his residence, Nijadham, is Goloka. And the Goloka is like a whirl of lotus flower. And his feet is always placed on that whirl of lotus of Goloka. And that's one of the reasons his feet is called a lotus feet. And also, his feet is so beautiful. The lotus resembles his beauty, or the lotus resembles the beauty of the Lord's feet. It's not the other way around. So, the Lord's feet is called lotus feet, because even the lotus, which is the most beautiful flower, lotus doesn't grow in beautiful gardens. It grows traditionally it grows in muddy places. When monsoon comes in India and fills up all the dry ponds and lakes and gets muddy, and the lotus blooms in it. In spite of growing in that muddy places, the lotus is exquisitely beautiful. It's just amazingly beautiful. And the fragrance it emanates is just amazing. It's just wonderful. Bhavananda Prabhu used to tell me a story. In the initial days, they had a boat coming from Calcutta to Mayapur. Initial days, in the sense when Mayapur temple was starting. So there was tourist boat which used to come through Ganges to Mayapur. I don't know, maybe from Calcutta, I don't know, from Krishnanagar. And some Westerners used to come. And for them, they would come and see the lotus in Mayapur. We used to have lotus gardens. They used to see the lotus. And the lotus, they have never seen the lotus before. That's the first time they see it. And so they could just appreciate the beauty of that flower, how amazing and beautiful the flower is. And then, so it's a natural opportunity for devotees to preach that when Westerners come, or people who don't know the beauty of lotus, when they see and they admire, then we can relate it back that the lotus gets its beauty from the feet of the Lord. So we can imagine how beautiful the Supreme Personality of God is. So he used to tell me there's a wonderful preaching opportunity to have lotus gardens in Mayapur. I was there with him, and he was telling me, we should have nice lotus gardens, so that when Westerners come, they can relate to the lotus feet. So it gives a tangible way. Looking at the lotus gives a tangible way one can relate to the beauty of the Lord's lotus feet. See, I'm going on some tantrum here. Where I was glorifying Shiva because he is in touch with the lotus feet of the Lord. Yeah, and this lotus feet also has this amazing nectar, lotus nectar or honey in it. Yeah, I have to just admit, I was just absolutely fortunate because I lived in Mayapur. When I was living in Mayapur, there was a huge flood, and the entire Mayapur was covered with water, apart from where the properties are. The fields, everything got covered with water. And then the lotus just sprung everywhere. For a couple of years, we just had just plenty of lotus, just mountains of lotus grown just by itself. And the devotees used to go on a little dinghy and pluck the lotus. And those days I was dressing the deities in Mayapur. So, you know, he used to put the huge lotus garland, and you can just, the smell is just intoxicating. It's hard to explain. You got to be there. It was just amazing. So I feel very fortunate or lucky to be around so much lotus, you know, using it for, you know, uh, wearing it on the gopis and Krishna. It was nice. It was a wonderful experience. So that subtle, sweet-smelling lotus has this honey. So Rupa Goswami says, Rupa Goswami is, you know, the founder acharya of our tradition, the greatest acharya. We are all Rupanugas, and he prays to the Supreme Personality of Godhead that his mind be like a bee, a honeybee, and let it rest always at the lotus feet of the Lord. Because of the honey which emanates, he always wants to be in a position like a honeybee, which is, you know, placed or, you know, attracted to the lotus feet of the Lord. And he goes on explaining that that access to the lotus feet is not even possible for Lord Brahma. It's not easily offered. He claims it's not possible for Brahma to attain the lotus feet. But for a devotee, or he talks about himself that he says, even though Brahma can't attain it easily, me being a very unqualified person, how am I going to attain? But because the Lord is Dina Vatsala or Bhakta Vatsala, he is very dear to his devotees, or he is very dear to the fallen. So me, Rupa Goswami here, says that me being fallen and also a devotee of you, I'm sure I will have the access, or I know you will give me the access to the lotus feet or the honey of your lotus feet. The statement here is like, even for Brahma to attain the lotus feet is not easy, by Rupa Goswami. What is that? Pantastu koti satavatsara sampragamyo vayor atapi manaso munipungavanam sopyasya prabhata vichintya tattve govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami pantastu koti satavatsara. So even for great sages and munis, satavatsara, thousands of years, you know, they are worshipping for thousands of years. They're meditating, practicing yoga, or the yogis who control their breath through pranayama and all other yogic processes where they control the breath to see the Paramatma of the Lord. So they are practicing these processes for satavatsara, hundreds and thousands of years. And what are they trying is to attain a glimpse of the tip of the nail of the lotus feet of the Lord. So they're spending all these years, you know, all this hard meditation and controlling the breath and pranayama, this and that. All their aim is just the tip. But for devotees, the lotus feet is easily available. So even though it's very hard to attain, for the devotees, it's easily attainable through the process of devotional service. So that lotus feet. So even though for great individuals like Brahma or the demigods hard to achieve, Rupa Goswami claims it's easy, or it is possible. It's in the realm of possibility that he can attain, or devotees can attain the lotus feet of the Lord. Okay. And again, going back to, as we discussed, Ganges can purify the prarabdha karma of sinful activities which have done, but it's still the desire to enjoy still remains in the heart. So the desire to enjoy could drag one further into sinful activities. Even though he's purified all his bank balance, but there is a tendency to make more bank balance of good or bad karma. But for devotees who have taken shelter of the lotus feet by the process of devotional service, that tendency is also purified. The tendency also is purified. What is it, verse 8.14? Ananya chetasa satatam yomam smarati nishchitaha nityataha nityasaha tasyaham salabam partha nitya yukta yoginam. For the yogis, or for devotees here, the process of attaining devotional service, purifying the senses, or bringing the senses into control, is quite easy. Tasya sulabam partha, because they are always ananya chetasa. They are always meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord. Since they are always meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord, the process, which is very difficult, becomes very easy. Tasyaham sulabam partha. Sulabam means very easy, easily attained by devotees. And Bhagavad Gita again, yoginam api sarvesham madgata antaratmanaha shraddhavan bhajate yomam sumay bhakta yuktatma mataha. The yogis the yogis practice pranayama and ashtanga yoga and this and that, and the jnana yoga, karma yoga, and all these are transitional processes. When you perform karma yoga, you're supposed to come to a platform of jnana. It means you should come to a platform of detachment and renunciation, and that is jnana yoga. And by practicing jnana yoga, then one has to come to the buddhi yoga, and from buddhi yoga one is supposed to come to bhakti yoga. So these are all transitional processes. So one can't just stay in karma yoga and achieve liberation. It's a transitional process. But devotees who have taken shelter of the bhakti yoga directly through worshipping the lotus feet, there is no need for all these transitional processes. They are immediately placed in pure devotional service. So it becomes tasya sulabam partha. It becomes very easy to attain. So a devotee is not, has to force himself to go through the process of karma yoga, to the process of jnana yoga or buddhi yoga. He can directly take part in devotional service. For other practitioners of other systems of yoga, and if you want to do karma or jnana, those processes are difficult. And people who don't have the shelter of the lotus feet, they have to follow those processes. They have to go through karma yoga so that they can get the renunciation and they can get the detachment. For devotees, it is sulabam. It's very easy. You can see here Kadama Muni. By devotional service, all the benefits of karma and jnana is easily achieved. He can generate a whole palace, a flying palace in the sky, with no effort. It's easy for him. And of course, he didn't perform all the austerities in devotional service to create palaces, but it is there for him if he wants to use it. So here, Kadama Muni is, as related in the verse, yoginam api sarvesham. Since he is attached to the lotus feet or worshipping Krishna through the process of devotional service, it's easy for him to be situated or to even exhibit mundane feats of mystic power. Yeah. And we also have Tulsi Maharani. Tulsi Maharani is, we worship Tulsi Maharani on a daily basis. we drink the water with tulsi in it because she purifies. And she has attained that glorious position because Krishna doesn't accept anything without tulsi in it. You can't offer bhoga, you can't cook wonderful food and offer to Krishna without tulsi in it because he doesn't accept. She has attained that wonderful status. We worship tulsi every day. First thing in the morning, we worship Tulsi Maharani. She has attained that wonderful status because she is always situated in the lotus feet of the Lord. So her glory is, she becomes glorious because of her relation with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his lotus feet. His Devahuti in future verses, she goes on and says that what is the big difficulty? What is so wonderful that you have laid in my stomach as a child? Because the Lord is going to take birth as Kapiladev from the womb of Devahuti. And she says, what is so wonderful? To taste the sweetness of your lotus feet, have appeared as a little child floating on a banyan leaf in this massive water of dissolution. So for you to appear as my child, I can't see. There's nothing. There's no surprise. So the lotus feet of the Lord is so sweet that even the Lord sometimes wonders why so much. I mean, all these devotees are obsessed. All my devotees are obsessed with my lotus feet. Why they worship my lotus feet. Whether they're so holding on to the lotus feet. There's two kinds of. There's two levels. One for an aspirant, for a Shraddhavan, or for a practitioner, or for a beginner. Holding on to the lotus feet helps them to overcome the material tribulations, also progresses into devotional service. For people who have already attained perfection, one might think, oh, they already attained perfection. Why, they don't need to hold on to the lotus feet. They can just dance with Krishna, they can hold on to his arms or his face. No, but the devotees are still, even once they have attained the perfection stage, they're still attached to the lotus feet. So Krishna is wondering, there must be something amazing. There must be some sweetness in my lotus feet that the devotees, the students or the experts, they're all attached to my lotus feet. So I want to know what it is. I want to taste myself. So he appears on a banyan leaf. Banyan leaf is just a tiny leaf. If you go to a banyan tree, the tree is big, but the leaf is reasonably small. It's not like a banana leaf. It's big. Banyan leaf is tiny. And he appears as a child on the banyan leaf. And during dissolution, dissolution means all the planetary system, the entire material world is submerged in that water of dissolution. And the waves are very turbulent. That it's so turbulent that people in the upper planetary system get disturbed, so they go to Brahma, and Brahma also gives up his planet and goes back to Godhead. So it's that turbulent, that ocean. But Krishna appears in that ocean in a small leaf as a baby, and he puts his little toe, the pinky toe, on his mouth to taste the sweetness of his own lotus feet. Have you guys seen that picture? It's a common picture in South India, and it's also mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam, where Krishna is sucking his lotus feet as a baby. I think it's Maitreya or Markandeya Rishi got to see that vision. Markandeya Rishi got to see that vision. So we can see, even for the Lord himself, his lotus feet is amazing. It's the sweetness is amazing that even he himself wants to taste. It's very similar to the pastime of Mahaprabhu, where he is surprised with the mood of Radharani. He wants to, Krishna is surprised, the mood of Radharani, the pleasure she gets from serving Krishna himself. So he wants to taste that nectar, taste that the pleasure what Radharani is experiencing. So he appeared as a Mahaprabhu. Similarly here, Krishna appeared as a little baby so that he can suck his own lotus feet and taste the nectar of his lotus feet. And for devotees, non-devotees, people in this material world, is a world of tribulation. There's constant fear. What is that? What is it? What is that? Vipadam. Padam yet tad vipadam. So every step is a danger. There's constantly this danger. Even if you're pious, it doesn't matter if you're impious or pious, it doesn't matter. There's always danger in this material world. You can see the story of Parikshit Maharaj. He's the most pious king you can find. He's a glorious Vaishnava. His name is Vishnurata because he was saved by Lord Vishnu himself, by Krishna himself in the very womb. So he's been related to Krishna right from birth. And his grandparents are close associates of the Lord. In spite of being such a wonderful, great personality, the most pious king you can find, still he was subjected to a curse of a Brahmana because of circumstantial being in the material world, because of circumstances. He was cursed by a Brahmana. But since he has taken firm shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, he was completely fearless of the imminent danger of death. We speak about death, we see people dying, and we know the story of Yamaraj and Yudhishthira Maharaj, where Yudhishthira Maharaj says to Yamaraj that the most wonderful thing in this world is that people are still dying. Everybody is dying, but the individual thinks that the death is not going to come to them. But we are in this illusion that death is not going to come to them, or we don't understand how painful and dangerous death is, both physically and emotionally. It's just such a scary thing. We are in our, youthful, but we are in a good shape now. But when it comes to old age, the concept of death is very scary, because that's the medium the soul has been operating. The soul is so attached to this body. To give up that body, it's easy to say, even for devotees, but when it comes to the time of death, it's a very scary thought. But for devotees, since they've taken shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, like Parikshit Maharaj here, he was completely fearless. The word used is akuto bhayam. The devotees of the Lord are fearless because they have taken shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. So since Parikshit Maharaj has taken two things. One, even for a great personality like him, being in this material world, there's always an opportunity to be put in an awkward situation, to get cursed, or to commit sinful activities. So we are always in danger. And once or we are in the mouth of death all the time, the second thing. So for both of these phenomena, by taking the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, one becomes fearless, akrito bhayam. And not only one becomes fearless, but also one becomes capable of performing wonderful activities. Like Prabhupada, his name is Abhay Charanaravinda. Abhay, he's fearless because he has taken Charanaravinda, he has taken the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. You can see his life. When you're 70 years of age, traveling to a foreign country with no contacts, no money, no leads, nothing, old age. But he was fearless. With a couple of heart attacks, I'm sure a little bit of headache. You're thinking, oh, I don't want to get up for Mangalarati. I'll just sleep in. Just in little inconvenience. When I was going out on Sankirtan in my days, little excuse. Oh, I'm feeling a bit sick. I don't want to go out. You come up with all these excuses to go out and do devotion service. But here, Prabhupada had 2 heart attacks within a very short time. Within very short time. And irrespective of it, he was fearless. And he went and did an amazing task which none of his god brothers or anybody, god brothers or non-god brothers, anybody in history has never done before. With the known history, nobody has done that. You can imagine you meet somebody, book distributors or preachers. You meet somebody, and to tell them about Krishna, it's just such a difficult task. They're not at all interested. It's like it's a hard work. Just to make one person just to listen or appreciate or take up devotion service is such a hard work, which we take it for granted. But imagine what Prabhupada has done. Thousands and thousands of devotees, temples, books, the purports. Inconceivable. Just absolutely inconceivable. Because of taking shelter at the lotus feet of the Lord. The prayer Prabhupada sings, the prayer he wrote. Did he write that prayer in the praise to the lotus feet of the Lord in Jaladuta, or he wrote it before? Baba Vibhushana, do you know? On the very boat. So he writes this prayer about emphasizing his mission and the desire of his spiritual master, praying to the lotus feet of the Lord. So here the Acharya is setting example. Even this task which you can't even imagine, you can't even fathom, comprehend the task he has achieved, he's exhibiting that by offering the prayer to the lotus feet of the Lord. He's summoning or petitioning for his future task, what he's trying, what is set out to do. So, with the strength of the lotus feet, he was able to achieve it. It's a good tip in that poem for devotees. When you see the first verse, he's praying to the lotus feet of the Lord for the mercy of the lotus feet of Radharani. For devotees, it's if you approach Radharani, you ask for the mercy of Krishna, and you approach Krishna and ask for the mercy of Radharani. So, since they are so dear to each other, when they hear that, the devotee wants her mercy, I'm happy to give it. So it's a trick what Prabhupada uses there in the very first. So he prays not directly to the lotus feet of, even though the prayer says lotus feet of, praise to the lotus feet of the Lord, the first verse, Radharani, how could I kushi hobe? How could I make Radharani pleased? So he's praying to the Lord Krishna how to please Radharani. So it's a nice technique we can learn from that, how we can get the mercy of Krishna or Radharani. So devotees are fearless and they are able to achieve these wonderful activities because they have taken shelter of the Lord. The word here uses vyasanatayaha, which indicates they are not disturbed. Vyasana means worry, disturbance of the material world. They are in a position beyond the disturbance of what the material world throws at them. Apart from just one point here, I was reading what is in 10th canto. You can see it's the example or the analogy is given against Vasudeva, Krishna's father. The same thing works here too, because Kardama Muni is also the father of the Lord. Here one might see that Kardama Muni apparently being engaged in opulent sensual activities, palaces, enjoying with women, his wife. One might think that doesn't add up, or one might think it looks like not so spiritual activity or contaminated activity. In 10th canto, explaining the position of Vasudeva, I think the demigods say this. Like if you go and take bath in Ganges, one might see some dirty things floating. There's the foam forms in Ganges. It doesn't look good, it looks a bit dirty. Or some dirty things are floating by. But devotees don't mind that. They don't criticize Ganges for that. Or the auspicious qualities, the wonderful qualities of Ganges is not diminished by those foam or those things floating. So devotees push away those foam and take bath in Ganges. Similarly, here Kardama Muni might have seemingly, from a mundane point of view, might have some qualities which might not appear to be spiritual, but these are like the dirty things floating on Ganges. It doesn't affect the Ganges. And devotees are not affected by that neither. They still respect Ganges. They still bathe in Ganges. So the lotus feet of the Lord, which is marked with conch shell, chakra, padma, gada, thunderbolt, flag, all. What is it? Ankusha, the elephants. What is the elephants used by the elephant god? What the Mohat use? The stick, whatever you call it. That one. These are the signs of the lotus feet of the Lord. So devotees get great pleasure seeing these marks on the ground if they go to Vrindavan. Great personalities like Akrura, when he came to pick up Krishna and Balaram to take them back to Mathura to celebrate the celebrations set up by Kamsa. The first thing he saw was the lotus feet of Krishna and Balaram. And immediately, he lost his consciousness, or he falling on the ground and worshipping those lotus feet. It gives immense pleasure for the devotees, those marks. And similarly, the gopis, when they're going about doing their things in the forest, they get to see the markings in Rajabhumi, the marking on the lotus feet or the footprints of Krishna. So they take immense pleasure. And not only that, when Krishna disappears in Rasa Leela, all the gopis are tracing the lotus feet of the Lord, and they're thinking about the Lord, and they can speculate, or they can understand what the Lord has been doing when he disappeared. Oh, he has disappeared here with Radharani, because they can see his lotus feet and her lotus feet. Here is a place, Radharani complained that, here is a place where Krishna reached out to a tree and plucked a flower and gave it to Radharani. How fortunate is Radharani. And looking at the feet, they can say that this is a place where Radharani complained that her legs are hurting. So Krishna lifted her up, and they're just glorifying the amazing quality of Radharani. That's how wonderful is this gopi that Krishna she got lifted up by Krishna. So from this lotus feet, they are getting all this information. And when Krishna leaves Radharani behind, and then they can see that the lotus feet of Krishna has disappeared, then they understood, oh, Krishna has left even her, even Radharani. So Radharani should be in distress. So they were searching for Radharani to express their feeling of separation, to give her, what's the word? To console her, thank you, to console her. So his lotus feet, the marking on the lotus feet, it just gives immense pleasure for devotees in all spectrums, from gopis to Radharani to the Lakshmis, and to fallen souls like us. It's the source of all pleasure, all nectar, and for devotees, it's just an excellent opportunity to just meditate on that lotus feet all the time. On that note, I'll finish. If you have any questions or comments, corrections. Yeah. Thank you. That's a good question. Well, yes, thinking of lotus feet, yes. But devotional service, or chanting the holy name of the Lord, is also thinking of the lotus feet of the Lord. The lotus feet also emphasize the service of the devotees. The devotees are serving. That service aspect is related to the lotus feet. So any service we perform we are performing for the lotus feet of the Lord. The chanting, the process of devotional service is to attain the lotus feet of the Lord. So the devotional service we practice, that is also for the lotus feet of the Lord. So if you're distributing books, or you're cooking for the Lord, or you're preaching, you're reading Bhagavatam, all these are activities in relation to the lotus feet of the Lord, or to attain the lotus feet of the Lord. It just depends on the level of love a person have for the lotus feet. For initial stages, we have to force ourselves, or you forget, you get engaged in activities, devotional activities, and our thought is more on the physical act than the lotus feet in the initial stages. But for advanced devotees, it's not forced. It's the physical act and them constantly thinking of the Lord. It's happening simultaneously. There's no distinction. For example, if I don't know, just giving a mundane example. If I'm driving, I have to concentrate on driving. That's my focus. If I'm thinking of some devotional, lotus feet of the Lord, and not concentrating on driving, it could cause an accident. For a devotee in a very advanced state of life, they have mastered both. When Prabhupada is negotiating with the printing press people, he is constantly thinking of the Lord, and he is expertly negotiating business. So for a pure devotee, devotees in advanced stage, those two activities are happening simultaneously. They have mastered to multitask. For us, but again, still it's all right. Still, it's wonderful. You're engaged in direct devotional service. That is the representation of the Lord. You are engaged. So that is good. A crude example is when a person falls in love. And if the lover is not, especially the honeymoon period, a person is constantly thinking of the lover. And still the person is performing their activities. But you can see it's happening simultaneously. It could happen simultaneously. You can see, this is a crude example. Even for devotees, it's like the transitional stage of doing an activity and focusing on the activity, and or meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord. The transitional phase could be where, like, Like if you take a place which is, how do I put it? A place, a small hole surrounded by water, a hole surrounded by water. If you push the water away, for a moment there's no water, but immediately the water fills up. So meditation of the lotus feet of the Lord is like that. For a devotee in the transitional stage, could be he might temporarily, very momentary time, he may be seemingly engaged in mundane activities or activities which doesn't directly reflect his attraction for the lotus feet, but immediately it fills up. Immediately his mind goes back. So that it's also a transitional stage, various levels. But of course, as I mentioned, pure devotees, whatever they're doing, at the same time they're constantly thinking of the Lord. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's my recent realization is one has to just program their life to constantly think of the Lord. One have to. Then everything else, other activities becomes in line or becomes less troublesome, so that you can think more. So just practice that multitasking. But of course, I don't want you to have an accident. But you know what I'm saying. But use the intelligence and still drive, but still meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord. Okay. Any more questions, comments? Granth Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Jai Gaur Premanande. Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Vancha kalpatarvishya kripa sindhubhyo vicha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.